Hello and welcome to another week of the Pinkbike podcast, brought to you by the power of the internet. My name is Henry, and this week I'm joined by Kaz and Jessie to talk all things mountain biking, rattle through some news. Hopefully, and I wouldn't count on it, get some sense out of us when it comes to your questions, as well as, hop-stepping our way through the week's news. Kaz, you've won on a little holiday, and welcome back.
Thanks.
You've missed the worst bit of mountain biking weather, so you've timed it really well. And Aman, you went skiing. Is that what it is? Is it skiing?
yeah.
Skiing.
I went skiing. It's a different sport. There's no wheels involved. But yeah, no, I took some time off and went skiing because, as you said, it was gross here and just frozen and cold. So when it's frozen and cold, you should probably do a different sport sometimes. So that's what I did.
I was thinking of you and your free ski past, because you were pretty good at the old slip slides, eh?
Like medium good-ish. Yeah, I wasn't like a professional or anything, but I did some like competitions on telemark skis and did silly things. Yeah.
Dude, I saw a guy telemarking in Whistler with a full telemark and doing it good, like looking real good, and a cowboy hat. And I just thought, you know
He's
what?
so cool.
That's it, man. That's the move.
Yeah. Like, unfortunately, telemark skiing, I feel like it's been kind of co-opted by hipsters. So it's now, if you do it, you're trying really, really hard to be sort of like retro and cool. And like, you're really, when I did it, it was still, maybe there was an element of that, but it's what everybody was doing where I was living. It was almost more people were tele skiing than alpine skiing at the time when I was living in Crested Butte. And so it just seemed like, oh, that's like the cool new thing. It's an easy way to get to the backcountry, because backcountry equipment really sucked at the time for like alpine touring stuff. Wasn't really as good as it is now. That's why I first got into it. And then it is a really fun way to turn and cool way to travel through the mountains. But unfortunately, the equipment never really progressed to where I wanted it to. So now I'm alpine tour and don't tele anymore.
So for those of you that maybe aren't familiar with skiing, normally you're locked into your binding front and back. Telemarking is when you basically sign your own death warrant and you only have the toe. And you have to do this weird thing. It's like a mixture between Pilates and skiing.
Yeah.
It looks weirdly graceful though. When people get it good, it looks really good.
Yeah, you can make it look good when people are new at it or haven't quite figured it out. It can look strange, like you're just doing the splits going down the hill, and kind of looks very dangerous. But it's not. It's pretty. I found it pretty easy to learn, but it is the opposite. The turning characteristics are opposite from downhill skiing. So like normally when you tele ski, if you're turning left, your left foot goes back and your front foot goes forward. But it's the opposite way around for tele skiing, or for alpine versus tele. Yeah. So it's a little different. If you're trying to like switch, your brain can sometimes do some tricks on you. You realize you're like dropping the wrong foot or whatever. But yeah.
Could it be similar to going from flat pedals to clips?
Maybe, or it'd almost be probably closer to switching your brakes around, like braking with one versus the other on different sides of the bars.
Signing your own death warrant.
Yeah.
This past week in New Zealand, we saw an event this natural selection thing. Now that came from skiing, right? That's a winter sports thing.
Yeah, I think originally Travis Rice had the thing where he had like basically man-made pillow lines. He had almost like North Shore stunts up in the trees. And I think that's the original one of it. And then it kind of changed into this different sort of series that they have now.
Yeah, I know. I think it's interesting. It feels like mountain biking's exploding in all different directions at the moment when it comes to doing like manicured but massive things. And, the injury rate I thought was quite something, similar with hardline, but
yeah, the name doesn't work that good. When everybody gets hurt, natural selection isn't like a good name for an event.
I never thought of that.
Yeah, it's like a Darwin. I don't know. This one seemed rough. I just kind of didn't follow it as closely as like hardline or anything. But from what I saw, it looked like a lot of people got pretty badly hurt.
And Jessie, how much riding have you been doing in Scotland, or have you been distracted by the very exciting things happening in Patent Land, which is very, very important?
Sadly, that story did ruin a planned ride. But the news stories have to go out. So Fox, I've had a patent granted for a gearbox. So the details are pretty thin on the ground. We can't tell how many gears it's got, or when we might actually see one. I've reached out to Fox, but I've not had any comment from them on it yet. But it's quite exciting. It could mean that we will see a lot more athletes, maybe not in 2025, but maybe in 2026, competing for the Gates belted purse. €100,000 prize, I think it is, for winning a World Cup on a belt drive. a lot of the patent talks about them using a chain, but they do also mention that it could work equally well with a belt. But yeah.
And when we think about, I think it was 2019 that Shimano had a patent approved for their gearbox, which was maybe sort of more similar to what I know, like with the Honda, like almost like relying on a cassette that happened to be inside the frame rather than a planetary gear system. Do you think that? What do you think the odds are that this will actually ever see the light of day?
Sorry, I've not seen the Shimano one that you're talking about.
I meant the Fox one in general.
Yeah, I want to say, if we're gonna say one from anyone, like I imagine, like under Raceface, their componentry brand. I think it's it's hard when you're on the record. But
stop fence sitting. Yes or no?
On the fence, I'm gonna get off it. I think they'll make it. I think they will make it.
Yeah. Well, it would make sense for as brands try and like flesh out. Obviously SRAM is such a family. They can basically do a head-to-toe bike. If Fox Raceface, they've got the handlebars, wheels, forks, suspension, shocks. If they could get some kind of drivetrain and potentially, because I feel like that's the way the bike industry is going. And Kaz, I don't know if it's something that you've sort of kind of, I know what your take on it is basically, but I often thought that was really interesting with T-Type, especially the GX. It was basically a way for SRAM to sort of control how much of that $7,000 premium mountain bike they got.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if you can do everything except the frame, it's pretty nice, because then for the frame manufacturer, they can come and be like, hey, we'll just take all your stuff and that's done. Like we have all the parts for our bike. And so yeah, that is why you kind of see some of that consolidation. Brands want to have as much as possible under one roof. And this thing, gearboxes still have limitations for bikes without motors and bikes that are not purely gravity assisted. But like the other day, I was riding an e-bike, and of course something went wrong, and the rear derailleur stopped working. And so I was able to move it by hand into gears, and I realized that you don't need 12 speeds on an e-bike. Like, not that I didn't know that before, but you really don't need 12 speeds. Like, you could get it done with 9 easily, because you have the motor to assist, to like fill in the gaps where normally your legs wouldn't give you enough power to do that. So like even a 6 or 9 speed gearbox on an e-bike, I think it could work pretty well, and that'd be kind of cool.
Well, would that not also? I'm thinking about as what I want to do with my current bike and running a sort of drivetrain device. Say I've got one of those E13 hubs on, for instance, and I'm thinking, do you know what? I might go to like and you're going to cringe, but like a 28 tooth or 30 tooth, but then like a 1136 Z rear mech that was just so small off the ground. Mm-hmm. Some of these mechs are getting so big, which then, in some ways, how good the modern 12-speed mech is creates one of the problems that people then seek to solve with the gearbox. Because with smaller rear wheels and these things are literally like at full extension, they're like a foot long. It's quite insane, really.
I know. I'm a big fan of more ground clearance, and I always, it's hard to have both. If you want that big range, and like you'll find, I'm sure, if you go back to the 2836 cassette, like it's pretty hard going up very steep hills with that. Like you've been spoiled, you might not realize, but then you go on like, oh yeah, it is nice to have this 50 tooth or 52, because we all rode that stuff back in the day. Like I was on 1x9 stuff for years, and we did it, but like once you do get used to be able to like spin a nicer cadence, it's pretty sweet. But again, especially on a mixed wheel bike with a 27.5 rear wheel, that cage is like an inch off the ground.
It's so close to the ground sometimes. And I always, as you know, like to descend in my 52 tooth, which only makes it worse. Some other things in sort of, development world coming out this week is, of course, that specialized demo prototype.
2 chains.
Now, well, here's the thing, Kaz. Does it have 2 chains? Because hear me out. If the chain went and looped above the cranks and there was like a 10-tooth sprocket on the crank, and then used that big idler as like a jockey wheel to get enough tension, providing you pedaled it backwards, you wouldn't need 2 chains. And we don't know that they're not.
That's true.
And
this could be,
I mean?
Yeah, it can be more arrow. Yeah, it's more arrow if you pedal backwards because the wind flow and the turbulence.
Dude, we don't know. I'm just saying.
No, there's no proof.
It might just, I was looking at the pictures and you can almost see some little cogs, and I'm just like, huh.
Yeah.
Or there is a gearbox in there.
Yeah. Well, what do you think is? Do you think there's just like a covering plate which they've obviously got form with? Jesse, do you think that this could be a way for them to?
I'm kind of joking because obviously they've got a cassette on the back of it as well.
No, they have.
That could be a big cover up.
But if you look at something like the Intense, the reason they're able to go to the gearbox is because they can basically just cut the bottom bracket shell out the frame. And, if they could position that area so it clears bits of kinematic, maybe, key points, they could maybe then at a later date kind of implant a gearbox into that.
Yeah, or maybe it's like a solid shaft, like jack shaft style, like not even a second chain. And I don't know, it's cool. I like Specialized in the last 5 years has been doing such a cool job of making interesting products. Like I think that they're definitely pushing it as far as prototypes in public, and I don't know, it's really interesting to see where they're trying to go with it, and they have results to back it up, which is obviously the riders are insane that they have, but it is pretty cool to see.
I've always, for the last, I think I've liked what Specialized and Öhlins have done in the sense of, for a time it was, how to put this, it was just such a concentrated effort on that team. Like the other way, like, Commensal, Scott and Canyon at one point were sponsoring like 5 teams each. Specialized were just so central and just like, we've got a Gen S and for the up and comers, but really we're just going to commit to these 3 obviously amazing races. And I thought as well that was something like counterintuitive there, but something quite cool about it. The fact that it was just like so honed and yeah. Cool. So we kind of actually rattled through our show and tells. I've kind of touched on them all without even realizing as we've got through it. And of course, if Specialized are listening, I will ride the bike if I have to. If they need some real feedback between the last frame, I'll.
Yeah, it's a sacrifice, but you can do
it. I know we always talk about it, and for full disclosure, Pinkbike, we do have this series in the video department coming out where it's, we cover the belted drive. And again, for full disclosure, part of my job is talking to them about how best to highlight the storylines and stuff. But I think it is really interesting with every time we talk about gearboxes, we of course mention the belted drive, and actually Gates, just their system is the belt, not the gearbox. And it feels like the other half of it is that the audience really likes this idea of gearboxes. But oftentimes in recent years, I mean, Levy was a big sort of proponent of the idea that actually the derailleur ain't that bad, and be careful what you wish for, because some of these gearboxes don't actually shift that well.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting, like the belts technology, and the belts tend to, at the times I've ridden them, do what they say on the tin, is almost hamstrung by the gearbox technology. But hey, that's something for them to worry about.
Interesting. It's an interesting, almost like marketing exercise to watch from the outside to see how it's working and how it's catching on. Like whoever thought of that at Gates is very smart. It's 2 years now that people have kind of had this excitement around gearboxes, and like you said, they're just making the belts for them. It's like a suspenders company, but then you need the good pants to go with it. It's like I think we can have some offshoot.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. If you have goofy jeans and people see them, but it's interesting. I like it. I mean, it's just more motivation for people to think outside the box, and if it works, and if it gets a privateer, some extra cash, like that's sweet too. That's what I really hope happens. Like some sort of, not necessarily a privateer, but like maybe not your typical person ends up on the podium on a gearbox bike. That's just one of those like perfect stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, sweet. We rattled through them pretty quick. Jesse, it's great to see you speak so much conviction that Fox will definitely be bringing this gearbox to market. Do you want to go back over, or are you sure?
So that was like the primary focus of the patent, was to look at the mechanism that they would use to allow the gearbox to shift under load. That's obviously one of the things that a lot of gearbox technology has struggled with. I think the Pinion Smart Shift system does a pretty good job, but even that, they will say in the small print somewhere that the system will decide to cancel a shift if it feels there is too much torque going through, as a way of preventing damage to the system. So I won't pretend to understand the mechanism that Fox is proposing, but that was the focus of the patent.
So is it to get are better basically to mean that you can shift more often and freer?
It didn't really like go too far into the advantages. Like it did discuss some advantages, being like obvious ones like chain retention, and it also made mention of putting the free hub either on the single sprocket on the rear or in the mechanism within the gearbox itself. And then they also covered how they could use the arrangement to tune anti-squat. So
That's interesting. I wonder how sometimes with the other zeitgeist thing at the moment is chain slap and how to limit it. I wonder if you could have a fixed, no free hub, fixed chain at the rear axle, because sometimes, yes, high engagement hubs do give you more ratcheting in certain situations, but when you have low engagement hubs, sometimes the whipping motion can be like a Mexican wave that follows down the chain. And I wonder if that was at a fixed point, if it would actually also reduce, and it would just at the cranks, if it could reduce the flailing of the chain, which can sometimes actually be, to my mind, like I think that the STFU Kavaric thing was sort of onto something quite early on, like by having something that basically just muted the limit of that chain.
I think that was actually the belts are pretty quiet though, right?
Oh, of course, yeah.
We just need softer chains.
Sure.
Like we
just need softer chains.
I think there was
you had 2 chains.
Yeah, here's soft chains.
There was maybe chat about some of the belts falling off in like super muddy conditions. I'm not sure what race that was.
Imagine that. Imagine if somebody didn't, they were up 10 seconds or whatever in the wet and the slop, and they came to, because Reece Wilson happened to him in snowshoe. Remember, he bent his chainring, and something like that, it would be. I mean, do you think? Imagine as a racer, you'd be like, "You've just done me out of $100,000."
Yeah. As long as you grab that belt, like somehow, if you can't let it fall off, you have to just cross the line with the belt. I would wear one around my belt. Like I would make a Gates belt as my belt just for backup, just in case, and then you can.
Just a quick trailside fix.
Yeah.
Something weirdly which crops into my mind quite often is you telling me that years ago when you tested the Bell Super, you wore the waist.
Oh yeah,
the chin bar around your waist.
I figured out my waist is small enough that I could just slide the detachable chin bar, that silly helmet, like around on my waist, and I could just pedal up that way.
I thought it was great. Every time I see someone in a Bell Super, I just think they don't know.
No, they don't know the possibilities. Yeah. We'll have to maybe talk about those silly helmets one of these days, because I'm glad that trend seems to have gone away. But
it really has gone away. Hey.
Yeah, it's just kind of like wear a full face or wear a half shell, or even the 3/4. But the detachable thing, I don't know. It always seemed a little bit excessive.
I think it's like if there wasn't the concept of value, it wouldn't be problematic. But the problem is that people that feel they need that sort of choose and absolutely make sure they feel comfortable and protected with say that detachable chin bar riding their XE pedal trails at home or enduro trails. Then they go to the bike park and they're like, I'm not going to spend $400 on a downhill helmet.
Yeah,
I've got this thing, and it's like,
yeah.
Also, the shame of them was that like some of them you could, if you tried to put the chin bar on without taking your helmet off, you could put it on and think that it was on properly, but actually the pins hadn't gone into the right place.
Yeah, like sticks out on one side. And
So, yeah.
Did you ever get into them, Jessie? The detachables?
I wore a Met one for quite a long time. The parachute, not the original one. I think it was probably the second generation one. That was quite good. You didn't there was reduced risk of accidentally mounting the chin bar incorrectly, and it was pretty lightweight. But you're right. Like if you're gonna be taking risks such that you feel you need a proper full face helmet, then probably just buy one that is made specifically to be one all of the time.
And I think that really, I mean, a lot of that almost happened it kind of corresponded with enduro becoming more popular. So people kind of thought, like, I'm doing enduro, I'm doing this big long backcountry thing, I need different items. Like, remember the early days of enduro when people would carry 2 helmets? Like, I remember Jerome Clements carrying a full face on his back and then a half shell on his head, because you had to have 2, or you always had to have a helmet on the entire race. Like, you weren't allowed to do transfer stages without a helmet on. So there was lots, like, people were carrying 2 helmets. I was like, this is insane. Like, this is not going to catch on. So, yeah.
But also, do you think that with the, I mean, I don't know what Enduro World Series stuff is going to look like next year, but I believe the criteria now is sort of the trails to be ridden on 100, like almost more trail bike racing than big
supposedly
burly enduro bikes. So maybe that could come back. I don't know. You know, I loved it when enduro was people riding stages that were the stuff that watching you'd be absolutely like jealous of and desperately want to ride yourself. Where it was actually that open face stuff, but a bit slower, and it wasn't just like a minute and a half downhill stage where people going at God knows how fast.
I think I'd still wear a full face just because when you see how fast they go, it's just like if you did hit a tree. I mean, I'm not sure. Yeah. It's hard to say how it'll look, but yeah, that's probably, we can dig in this more sometime.
Well, shall we get into some questions? We've got 3 this week coming in hot. I did them yesterday and I can't remember what they were, so it's anybody's guess.
Perfect.
Let's go.
Hey guys, this is Tom from Denver. I had a question regarding your opinion on third option rather than external or internal cable routing. On my 2020 Canyon Spectral, I have the essentially down to protector / guide for the cables, and I've just found it super easy to work on. Obviously, there are some downsides where potentially the bolts can pull through or it can break or crack. It's just a plastic down tube cover, but obviously they're replaceable, and in the meantime, zip ties definitely do the job. I was kind of curious what your opinion is on this and why we don't see more of it on other bikes. Thanks.
Wow. This is actually, it's really popular with the audience. People tend to really like the solution. I think there are some good executions. There are some bad executions. I think this Canyon Spectral, I actually had one a couple of years ago, and it was very difficult to get them off the fork crowns in terms of the rubbing and the rattling, because they came straight underneath the down tube. And it's really cool. You had this one solid piece, whenever I saw someone out, they always used to have very, very shiny fork crowns. GT have made a good stab of it, of course, with their external, but like shield routing. Polar basically just did whatever they want with it, and it always seemed to be okay. Jessie, what do you think of, where do you sit on the external, internal? If it was your own bike, what would you have?
I don't want the cables going inside the frame terribly.
You don't want?
Not really. I certainly don't want to work on through heads cable routing, that's for sure. I'm just looking at this Canyon now. So the cables are external, but they sit underneath a cover.
Yeah.
Underneath the
there's
down tube.
there's a cover that goes over it. So basically it has external routing, but then you just cover it to make it look more like sleek and clean. It's kind of like hidden. Yeah.
It seems like it's
looks
not too
neat.
terrible an idea. Like you're not gonna have the cables rattling around and making noise. And they're like,
why do we think
really
that maybe
accessible.
the industry wasn't so keen to adopt this? Or, I mean, some people have gone the whole hogcast and said, you're not getting any cables at all. You're getting not even internal routing, nothing.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of this style just because I think there's no point to it. Like, I think if you're going to go internal, it's one thing, you go external the other, but then that halfway house of just trying to like hide it, like just keep them outside and you can save the weight and the complication of the extra little garage that you're making for it. Personally, these days I'm kind of ambivalent. Like, I like when a bike has external cable routing, but internal it's come so far. Like, it's very frustrating if somebody has messed up their internal cable routing, like where it's rattling around and you need to fuss with it, because that's the worst. But whether it's a Specialized or Santa Cruz or just those type of companies, these days you can just feed the cable in, it comes out the front, and it's no fuss and very quiet. So I think that like that battler, I don't know, of that being a feature has kind of, things have gotten better. But yeah, I don't really see a need for the port or the garage cover thing.
Do you think that there's a part of it where, how to put this, it's kind of still cool to shit on cable routing internal?
Oh yeah, it's very like, if all your stuff is zip tied and duct taped to your bike, you're cool. Like, everything's on the
Pretty
outside.
cool.
Yeah, it's really cool.
And your shorts are held up by shoelaces.
Yeah, like if you look like you just have no money, but somehow you're pedaling an $8,000 bike, you're cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's okay.
It's like the kids that in Whistler where they all want to look like they work on like the roads, and so they all wear like work boots, these massive, and it's like, dude, I don't want to judge. No one knows what anyone's life like, but it's like, listen, you live in Whistler.
yeah. Their mom comes and picks them up in one of those like Porsche Panameras or whatever, and you're like, oh yeah.
Exactly. It's just a bit.
It's
kind of, I don't know, makes me laugh. Yeah. I don't know. I think that where we are, I think as long as you can like control the cable, I think that's what's really important about good cable routing. So you don't get any rub. And remember, starting riding 10 years ago, just trying to stop your cables rubbing on everything was a genuine nightmare. And the patches, and it's so nice not to even have to think about that now. I think with this halfway style, getting the entry and exit, if you see what I mean, where although it's not going internally, is actually quite hard to manage. And I think that like I said, the ones in this specific example, they tend to foul on the crowns, but other ones sometimes it can be quite hard to just manage and get them super clean.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Jessie?
I've got a cross-country bike at the moment. It's the Live Peak, and the shock is mounted vertically, and it's got a remote lockout. And the cable routing is to the lockout is obviously internal. It's not guided internally, and the distance between where the cable exits the frame and where it attaches to the shock, if that is not held in place to be like a fixed length of cable, as you compress the shock, it sends the cable up into the down tube, and then it gets it into like a shape in which it like tugs on the remote. So it can, like, as you push it through its travel, as you're riding it, it can lock itself out just when you need the travel. It can like, lock itself out, but and it rattles as well. But I mean, all of these.
And that's a hydraulic bottom
doing
out.
That?
That's a bottom out feature, so you don't bottom out hard. It just like it adds a lot of compression.
Just fucks you first.
But in 2025, that's insane to me.
A £12,000 bike as well. What shit?
Oh.
I mean, you can fix it. You just put some foam on the cable inside and put a zip tie around the cable so that length of cable can't change. But still, like, it's £12,000. Fix it.
Yeah. To be dialed.
Like, we have this crazy thing in the bike industry where it's normal to spend, say, $12,000 on a bike, and we always joke, I mean, with mud guards as well, but like, oh, now I need to basically get something that's not totally dissimilar to a milk carton cutout and cable tie it to the front of this bike because I want the luxury of being able to see where I'm going if I'm riding anything but the dry. Yeah. It's so bizarre. And we accept it. And it's like the fact, just MacGyvering stuff on a brand new bike is fucking nonsense.
Yeah. I mean, it took 30 years basically for for suspension manufacturers to start making fenders. No, I'm with you, Henry.
I know I am. I am. I'm just at the general, but it's the same as like with remote lockouts are a great example. Remote lockouts are a really useful thing.
Sure. All
this stuff about going electronic suspension that can read your mood and then sees you a Virgo sun rising, whatever shit, and then just give them a button that locks it out. That's all I want.
On off. Like that's all I need. I don't need the beep 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 beep. Leave the fork alone. I've still been waiting for that, and no one's done it. Like it seems like it should be easy. Like
if you wind off the cable tension, you can like adjust it so that like when you press the first lever, it only locks out. It only does the shock.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
We're still here. It's like so many years of just asking for a simple thing that I'm sure when it came out, people were like, how come this hasn't existed before? And
dude. It's going to be like 17 years of development. Like how many of those races they have? I mean, with both big manufacturers, Fox and RockShox, how many of them have remote lockouts on World Cups? They're all using that. They're using like rehashed reverb lever and stuff. Yeah. It
seems like a much
my brain.
But you got to keep those software engineers employed. They all need software engineers need jobs too. So if they can be creating apps and like lots of things, then it's
it's insane to me. It's insane. But hey, what do we know? But sorry, not to go in too hard. But one last point. I think Scott tried to do something with that twin lock thing, and that's I think the closest that's got to the system of actually working. But I think it goes the wrong way. I think that and we've spoken about before, but basically there should be a fully open grippy climbing one. There should be a middle compression setting, which is how you ride the bike and descend because you need some compression damping, and then a locked out one. But I think that they need to like skew it because that'd be super sick. Oh my God, I'm coming to like the chunkiest climb in the world. I'd go to the setting, which is basically like just drops you deep into the travel, is incredibly soft, like no compression damping. And I think that would be really interesting. I would love to ride that. But then again, Who needs grip, hey? Why not lock out your suspension when you're climbing all the time?
Hardtail's the future.
Yeah. Well, let's get on to our next question.
Hey, Pinkbike. It's Eric from Michigan here. I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on whether bike companies and bike designers are able to hit all of their design requirements that they're looking for, or whether we're still in this game of we're going to try to get this and we might settle somewhere on the way and we'll just maybe get it next iteration. If a company like Specialized wants to make a bike perform like X, can they make a bike perform like X? Thanks.
So, I mean, this is kind of quite an interesting question. Jessie, do you think we're riding the bikes the bike designers wanted us to ride? Or do you think we're riding an impression of the end goal?
I think some of us are. I think,
whether you're
frame
locked
size,
out live
probably.
as you use the travel.
I don't think they meant for that. I think the more variables you add into the mix, variables being rider height and rider weight and what they're riding, the harder it gets, right? For a designer to design something that takes into account all of those factors. So I think some riders are riding the bike that has the characteristics that were intended. But I think it's very difficult for them to not make compromises on like one of the frame sizes or the frame sizes at either end of the extremes.
And do you think, just to loop back around again, and sorry to maybe mix up two questions, but that's a really interesting point. Do you think that, for instance, when you take into account the rider's stature, do you think that Giant is able to do a better job at that by offering Live and Giant? Or do you think that's a separate issue in itself?
Possibly. Like they Live are certainly offering bikes for much, much shorter riders than a lot of brands are. So certainly, like whether you're a man or a woman, if you're very, very short, like you're shorter than like 5 foot, you should definitely be looking at the bikes from Live.
But just to go back to your point, and this isn't not to put Giant in the stand too much, but in general, I just think that every size should have a shock specific and kinematic specific tune, and I don't see why they can't just make, say, the Rain, or it doesn't have to be going under the Giant moniker only because that's the brand that's the bigger one, but just make them some sizes smaller. I don't know. This idea that like there shouldn't be an expectation that each size is tuned to be as good as possible for a $12,000 bike is insane to me. Like, I don't know. I don't know if that's me being unfair or not.
I think Rocky Mountain had size-specific shock tunes for a while. I don't know if they still do it.
I think most brands more brands do than you would think. A lot of them just don't tout that. Like the smaller sizes tend to have a lighter compression tune, I believe, for at least multiple brands do that. But yeah, it's whether they kind of hype it up or not. It's a thing. But yeah, it is.
YT would have a different compression tune for the small and the medium versus the large and the XL. I always do make a point of asking whenever I'm testing a bike, and usually more often than not, the answer has been no. The shock tune isn't adjusted. So I'd be interested to know.
And I guess it kind of depends on the range that tune is designed for. Like, I'd be interested to know what the minimum rider weight that they're tuning for. If they're tuning down to a 100-pound rider and they think that can accommodate, but yeah, in most cases, like you'll need a different tune for a 100-pound rider versus 200-pound. Like that's a huge spread. But yeah.
Kaz, do you think we're riding the bikes that the people intended?
It depends when you ride the bike. Like it can make some sort of like Venn diagram, because the bikes, bikes are designed by the time they hit the market, by the time you can actually purchase that bike, it's probably been 4 years since that bike started development. And there's a point in that development where that bike was everything that design team wanted, and it was going to be the best thing ever, and it's perfect. And it was still that way for a bit. And even when it comes out, it can still be the best thing ever. But even by the time it launches, they know what's next in the pipeline. So like, say this bike comes out, they're super excited about it, but they're already working on the next bike. And that one, they're going to be excited about that one because that one has the gearbox, it has the hover button, it has the whatever. So I do think that, yeah, companies are trying to put out the best bike they can, and they do, but things change so quickly or medium quickly that by the time it comes out, they're already on to the next project. If you talk to a product manager, they're like, right now we're in 2025, we're riding 2025 bikes, but they're 2028 right now, 2029 even, which seems crazy. So like, yeah, they are trying to make, it's not like they're waiting to the next one. Like, oh, sometimes that might happen, but I do think that they're trying to get everything they can to make that bike as good as possible. Like, it wouldn't really make sense to be like, we'll wait 4 more years to try to make this dialed. Like, they are trying to make them pretty sweet.
It's funny when you speak to someone that works, high up in a brand or, in the engineering department, and you mention a bike that might have come out a year ago and talk about some like geometry figure, and they're like, I can't actually remember, because for me, it was,
it
was a different lifetime.
Yeah.
It was so long ago.
So it's, and that's been interesting. In the last few years, we're seeing bikes launched that had been baking for a long time because they just kind of sat in warehouses. And so it's been interesting where, bikes are launching.
Baking or more cooling?
Yeah, cooling.
Cooling in the warehouse.
It gets pretty hot in Taiwan and Vietnam. So. But yeah, they've been cooling. So they got real cool. And then, so there was just kind of a different, just lots of products that were developed at different timelines kind of start to come out. So it seems like it's sorting itself out now. But yeah, to answer this person's question, I don't think that companies are necessarily there's not a lot that they can't do these days as far as like geometry wise or technology. I don't think there's a really one major limiting factor, but yeah, once a bike comes out, they're already working on the next big thing.
I think the limiting factor, the only one that I can think of, is when they try and make the same bike in alloy and carbon. I think there might be concessions there, to make the premium alloy model that looks like the even more expensive carbon model that's got stuff on. I wonder when they go to unique and interesting tube profiles and shapes, whether they don't then have to, because they're kind of maybe not playing into the strengths of that particular material, for it to be as either light or as stiff as possible, and then it becomes a whole thing.
Or if you're sticking a slot box on there and that type of thing. So there are concessions that are made. I think that they probably always wish they could do a little better, but I don't think they're not saving things for the next round typically.
Well, no, I mean, the way the bike industry is going, but
you don't know if
people might not have a next round.
Exactly. You got to make
this needs to be the one.
Yeah.
Right, well, let's get on to the final question.
Howdy guys, this is Riley calling from NorCal again. Thanks for your help a couple episodes ago with the tire discussion. And this time I'm calling with questions about chain damping devices, mainly Rimpact or O-Chain. Even though the Sidekick sounds cool and all, I don't have the budget or appetite to go in for a new wheel set or hub. So let's stick to those two. First question is, I'm curious because of kind of chasing a last bit of comfort out of the rear end of my YT Capra. I've got it super dialed. I love my bike. It's almost perfect, but I think that there's still a bit to be gained out of like reducing some harshness off the top. And I'm wondering if chain damping device is even doing that. Am I barking up the wrong tree, so to speak? Some context for me, I don't really care about the pedaling dynamic of it. Like I winch and plummet. I only really care about pedaling on trail rides. I travel on like 3 days a year. So you can leave that part of the discussion out. Mostly just, is it going to help with that part of the suspension feel in your, opinion? And also I have a little concern that it'll come at the cost of some like pop or speed generation on lips and berms, which is an important part of the ride for me. So wow. I don't know. What do you guys think?
We've got a lot to go through here.
Yeah.
Thanks.
We can make it easy though. Yeah, just buy an O-Chain.
Go on.
You'll like it. Just buy the O-Chain. It's sweet. It has a dial. You can adjust the different levels and just easy as that.
I agree. Buy an O-Chain. It's great.
Okay. Wow. Sweet. Well, thank you very much. And we will catch you guys next week. Tune in to the Pinkbike, I think that's in terms of comfort, do you think that these devices, starting with you, Jessie, do you think they can make a bike a bit more comfortable just by giving it a bit better tracking?
Yeah, I think it's the the listener touched on making the suspension more supple off the top. I don't think that's actually what's happening. I think it would be easy to perceive that as what is happening because you're not getting the feedback from the flapping of the chain coming through your cranks. And I think that is what is making the bike feel smoother and also quieter. Obviously, the marketing with the O-chain is mainly focused on its capacity to reduce pedal kickback, and it will do that in the very rare occasions that is actually happening. But I think the main benefit coming from the O-chain is that it's removing that feedback from the flapping of the chain.
So I think
sorry.
No, I would say just for that one point, I have never been able to prove it, but I run different suspension settings when I've got a drivetrain device on compared to when I haven't, and I've always felt that the suspension gets into its stroke easier and have to run more low speed when I've got, say, a Rimpact or a Sidekick on. And then I saw this weekend Dynamics, Nick Lester, who's a World Cup mechanic, really great data-led approach to. He was showing that actually he published this little post, which I'll put over the screen here, talking about how the way the suspension is used is different, at least on the Sidekick. And I wonder if that does translate, because to me it always felt like the shock feels a bit underdamped once you're putting these things on, in my opinion. And in the case of the Capra, we tested in 2021, and I do relate to the harsh feeling he's saying. But interestingly, the braking characteristic, I think, is also when that harsh feeling would most show itself. And that flapping of the chain you were talking about is a lot less prevalent under hard braking. And then I wonder if that's all sort of, cyclical,
But the chance of pedal kickback occurring is much higher when you're braking hard.
Yes. Yeah, totally.
So,
yeah, it's one of those things. It's hard to tell exactly what's happening, but as far as what it feels like, it does have that calmer sensation, and I think for that bike especially, it'd be a good improvement. And I'll go on the record now as saying I don't recommend the Rimpact at the moment. Just having used it, I just don't like the way that feels compared to the O-chain. But yeah, I
agree.
Have you read them both as well, Jessie? So
I have
both?
only pedalled the Rimpact. I've not ridden it downhill. And the listener said that they didn't care about how it feels to pedal, but I think they might actually, if they rode the Rimpact, they might all of a sudden care about how it feels to pedal, because it feels like very sticky. Like every time you're at that dead part of the stroke, it feels like you're trying to pull it away from a magnet or something. And it's really jarring. I'm sure some people could get used to it, but I don't think I'd want to go through the process of getting used to it to get the benefit for that. For me is unknown, because I've not ridden it downhill, but it's not comfortable to pedal.
Yeah, it does take. I've ridden it a bit, and I'd say it takes a couple of days. You do kind of get used to it, but it also it's a different thing. I think you notice it more when you're putting out more power, so on climbs, etc., etc. But then we did some testing, and a video is going to come out in upcoming weeks about Dari saying that there is then an inconsistency when descending, and then you get on the power and you feel like you're kind of need to spool up the cranks to really drive at the axle. Kaz, is it as simple as an O-chain then? Just fit and forget?
I think it is. Yeah, I think he'll enjoy it. If it's I've just been really impressed. I was skeptical at first until I tried one. Now I really like it, especially on the bikes that do have a little bit more of a harsh feeling. I had it on my Raw for a little bit, which I felt it improved it, but it's not one of those bikes that really needs it. But then recently I've been running on a Bronson, the new Santa Cruz Bronson, and I felt that really helped unlock it even more. So yeah, it's a cool feature, or a cool device, I guess.
Do you have to do much servicing on them, or are they pretty much?
Not really. You do. I mean, and they do take some service, and they have little elastomers, and it's another thing to keep in mind. But the service kits aren't too expensive, and if you are not too bad with maintenance, that's not too bad. The amount of service they require isn't insane, I wouldn't say.
Is it when you do your brake pads? That sort of
exactly. Just and they have a recommended service interval, which I can't remember, but it exists, and you can replace the little elastomers and that type of thing. But I've been thrashing mine probably well over the service interval in really nasty conditions, and it's been holding up well. So
I feel
you need to make sure that you're
from a grease port.
Yeah, I agree. I know. That'd be kind of, and that's why I was excited about the rim pack, because it does seem this could build a little bit better weather sealing. But one thing on the O chain, make sure you check your chainring bolts, because you're back to the old four bolt chainring, and those bolts can come loose if you forget. I was on a ride where I realized all my chainring bolts were loose, but some Loctite and tightened them up. But yeah, it's a cool thing. Yeah, for the listener, try it. Let us know what you think, but I recommend it.
Cool. Well, hey, that's all our questions wrapped up. Thank you very much for getting them in. And as always, you can leave them via a link on the Pinkbike homepage, and we will do our best to answer them. Thank you very much for watching. Thanks, guys, for giving up your time and telling us categorically about to buy an O-chain Kaz. That's a decisiveness that I'm looking for. And yeah, we'll catch you guys next time. Oh no, the outro. It's going to be late. The seamless production. Cool.